Welcome to Roll Credits, where movie lovers get the trivia they didn't know they needed, made with a little help from AI, so double-check your facts. Today we're diving into Apex. Did you know Charlize Theron often performs a large portion of her own stunts in action-heavy roles? And before we get into it, drop a comment with what we should cover next, old or new.
Yeah, and just a quick note for you listening, we are keeping this deep dive completely spoiler light today.
Right, exactly.
So instead of ruining the plot, we are putting a microscope on the brutal, high-stakes premise of Apex. We'll look at the unbelievable lengths the cast went to for practical realism and how the wilderness itself operates as the ultimate antagonist of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's mission is to unpack a massive stack of sources for this new 2026 Netflix survival thriller.
Directed by Baltazar Kormacor.
Right. And we've got soundtrack reviews, behind-the-scenes interviews, highly detailed production notes, and deep-cut location guides. We're really looking at the mechanics of how this movie balances incredible physical spectacle with a highly intimate psychological duel.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. And to understand how Apex achieves such a relentless level of tension, we actually have to look at its origins. Yeah. They were born out of a very real global sense of isolation.
Yeah, that's so true. The screenwriter Jeremy Robbins, he had been building this very solid career in television.
Right, working in writers' rooms for shows like The Purge, I think.
Exactly. And then, well, the pandemic hit, the industry just shut down entirely. His writer's room didn't reopen.
Man, that's rough.
Yeah, so he found himself sitting in total isolation, staring at a blank screen, trying to figure out what to create, when absolutely nobody in Hollywood was asking him to write anything.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you think about the psychology of that moment, Robin's writing process during the lockdown was like the emotional equivalent of being stranded on a cliff face.
That is a great way to put it.
Right. You're cut off from the world, deeply anxious, and having to figure out how to mentally survive day by day, knowing nobody is coming to save you. How did that real-world anxiety actually translate into the film's pacing?
Well, he turned to his favorite genre, the survival thriller. But he viewed these stories, not as grim tragedies, but as hopeful meditations on human resilience.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and the genesis of Apex started with one single terrifying image he pitched to his wife on a trip.
What was the pitch?
So he asked her to imagine a movie's opening scene. A couple is zipped up inside a small nylon camping tent.
Okay, standard camping trip so far.
Right. They wake up, one of them unzips the front flap, and instead of stepping out onto a forest floor, the camera pushes past them to reveal they are suspended thousands of feet in the air.
Wait, what?
Yeah, bolted straight into the side of a sheer vertical mountain cliff.
Oh my gosh. Just put yourself in that tent for a second. The visceral sensation of looking past your own boots and seeing nothing but a 3,000-foot drop through the clouds.
It's terrifying.
It really is. And that pitch became the narrative bedrock. So we meet Sasha, played by Charlize Theron, and her husband Tommy, played by Eric Bana.
Right, they are climbing the troll wall in Norway.
Which is this towering, imposing, vertical rock face. But suddenly, an avalanche strikes, and Tommy plummets to his death.
This is a brutal opening.
Right, so 5 months later, a grieving Sasha travels to the remote Wandora National Park in the Australian wilderness to heal. But out there in the bush, she crosses paths with Ben.
Played by Taron Egerton.
Exactly. A stranger who initiates a deadly, relentless hunt using a crossbow. And the brilliance of Robin's script here is that he strips away almost all exposition.
Yeah, we don't get those typical tearful monologues about Sasha's dead husband.
No, we learn the sheer weight of her grief entirely through her physical endurance in the wild.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that sense of lockdown anxiety translates perfectly into the pacing of the film.
How so?
Well, by stripping away the typical Hollywood backstory dumps, the movie forces the audience to actively lean in. You aren't passively listening to Sasha explain her trauma.
Right, you're watching her physically drag her battered body through the mud.
Exactly, and you slowly realize her desperate fight against Ben is actually a proxy war. She is fighting to overcome her grief.
Yeah, treating endurance as character development is just such a visceral way to force you, the audience, to inhabit the protagonist's psychology.
Absolutely.
And that reliance on physical action to convey deep emotion meant the production required a lead actor willing to subject themselves to extreme, authentic hardship.
And Charlize Theron definitely stepped into that void.
The demands placed on her were staggering. Like, there is a shot early on, a painfully tight close-up of Theron supergluing her own cracked fingers together.
Ouch!
Yeah, you see the split skin, the dried chalk, and you can practically feel the chemical sting of that cyanoacrylate burning into an open wound.
Well, that kind of authenticity requires intense preparation. She underwent a brutal month-long training regimen with expert rock climber Beth Rodden.
Just learning the ropes, literally.
Literally, they spent November of 2024 drilling the mechanics of climbing. And we aren't just talking about scampering up plastic holds at an indoor gym.
No, she had to master distinct disciplines, like bouldering, which is climbing lower to the ground without ropes.
Relying entirely on explosive dynamic power.
Right. And top roping, where the safety rope is anchored above you, requiring immense muscular endurance, plus rappelling, where you descend a cliff face by trusting your life to the friction of a metal device.
Which is terrifying in itself.
Oh, yeah. And belaying, where you are on the ground managing the rope, holding the literal life of your climbing partner in your hands.
Rodden actually noted something really fascinating during this training. Theron has an extensive background in classical dance, right?
Oh, right. I remember that.
Yeah, so that gave her a massive natural advantage on the wall. Dancers possess this incredibly high level of proprioception.
Wait, proprioception, what exactly is that?
It's the body's subconscious ability to sense its position and movement in space. So when you are clinging to a rock face, knowing exactly where your center of gravity is without having to look down at your feet, I mean, that's the difference between finding a micro-foothold and falling into the abyss.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
But even with dancer-level body awareness, the physical toll she took was just horrific. She insisted on doing her own climbing stunts.
Often completely barefoot, which is crazy.
On actual cliff faces.
Yeah.
Because Cormacour and his director of photography, Lawrence Sher, they insisted on capturing it practically. And the injury list she racked up is shocking.
Yeah, didn't she fracture a toe?
She fractured a toe slamming into a rock during a water sequence. And then, during the Norway shoot, she reached for a handhold that climbers call a jug.
Which is usually a large, secure piece of rock you can wrap your whole hand around.
Right, it's supposed to be safe. But her foot slipped. The entire weight of her body, combined with all that heavy climbing gear, just yanked violently downward. She completely tore her intercostal muscles.
Oh, wow. For context, if you don't know, the intercostal muscles are the ones situated between your ribs.
Right.
They're responsible for expanding your chest cavity so you can breathe. So tearing them means every single breath you take, every tiny rotation of your torso is just sheer agony.
Theron said she could barely wear a bra for weeks afterward, let alone hang from a cliff.
That is intense.
And add to that, she slammed her elbow into a thick branch during a river scene. An injury so severe it required 2 separate revision surgeries in post-production.
That's just brutal.
It is. And after all of that vertical climbing, she said maneuvering a kayak in the wild rapids was actually the absolute hardest part.
Really? The kayak?
Yeah, because the water is a chaotic system. A dancer's balance works on solid rock, but in a kayak, the ground itself is moving in 3 volatile dimensions.
That makes sense.
It was so brutal they had to bring in Olympic-level kayakers to coach her, and she joked she will never, ever buy a kayak. The emotional and physical strain was so intense she actually had to tap out and couldn't finish her final day of shooting. So I have to push back on this entire process for a second.
Go for it.
There is a line between dedicated method acting and just torturing your cast. I mean, when you have an A-list actor suffering torn muscles, fractured bones, and requiring multiple surgeries, I have to ask you, is this level of suffering actually necessary to make a good film? Or is it just Hollywood masochism?
Well, director Baltasar Kormákur really defends it as a core philosophy of his filmmaking. He actively seeks out the obstacle.
What does he mean by that?
He talks about waiting for the, quote, Hollywood glee to wash off the actors' faces. He doesn't want them looking fresh out of a climate-controlled makeup trailer just pretending to be cold.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, he wants the shivering to be a real physiological response. Because when an actor is genuinely exhausted, the hardship bypasses their performance technique and lives deep inside their body language.
Right. It proves to the audience that the struggle wasn't just synthesized by a visual effects team on a green screen.
Exactly. It creates a tangible, heavy reality that our brains recognize instantly.
And if your hero is being pushed to the absolute ragged edge of physical survival, you need a villain who exists entirely out of bounds to push them there.
So true.
Theron's physical extremes are mirrored perfectly by the psychological extremes Taron Egerton brought to Ben. Robbins designed the hero and the villain as distorted reflections of each other.
Right. Ben isn't an alien creature. He is this unfiltered, extreme manifestation of Sasha's own thrill-seeking lifestyle. In the script, Ben is written as the hero of his own story.
He genuinely views his hunt as part of a natural order.
Yeah, and Egerton's interpretation of that concept is what really elevates the role. He looked at the survival thriller genre and intentionally avoided playing the archetypal, hypermasculine, rugged lumberjack villain.
He even joked about that.
He did. He joked that the initial concept sounded like a role built for someone broad and imposing, like Joel Edgerton.
Right, right.
But instead, Taron Egerton crafted Ben as a warped Peter Pan figure.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah. He plays him like a child, pretending to be a grown-up, someone treating this horrific, lethal pursuit like a playground game of hide and seek.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about it. If Ben and Sasha are psychological mirrors of each other, does this film suggest that adrenaline junkies, people who willingly hang off the sides of frozen mountains for a weekend hobby, are inherently walking a very fine line between bravery and total madness?
What's fascinating here is how Egerton's performance weaponizes that exact question.
How so?
By subverting the macho serial killer trope, he makes Ben infinitely more terrifying because his motivations are completely flaky and erratic.
Like a toddler playing a game.
Exactly. They change the rules on a whim, they have no concept of consequences, and they possess zero empathy. You can't reason with a child playing a game, and you can't reason with Ben.
Wow, yeah. It exposes the dark underbelly of Sasha's own thrill-seeking nature. It forces you to question where the boundary lies between pushing your limits to feel alive and pushing your limits because you have a fundamental, detached disregard for human life.
And Egerton makes sure you feel that unpredictability on a sensory level. Like he makes these strange, jarring, animalistic cawing noises while he hunts.
Cawing. Like a bird.
Yeah, just imagine being in a silent, ancient forest, terrified for your life, and the grown man trying to kill you starts making playground bird noises.
That is deeply unsettling. It completely shatters the standard logic you expect from a threat.
It does, and his physical preparation backed up that unhinged energy. He skipped traditional weightlifting entirely.
Right, he didn't want to look like a bulky gym bro.
No, instead he subjected himself to brutal cardiovascular work, specifically doing air bike sprints.
Oh man, those are awful.
Yeah, an air bike or an assault bike works by using your own push and pull momentum against a giant fan to create resistance.
It spikes your heart rate to its absolute maximum within seconds, just flooding your body with lactic acid.
Exactly. Training that way doesn't build bulky glamour muscles. It trains the body to endure cardiovascular torture and recover instantly. Egerton wanted to be terrifyingly fast.
He said the training made him feel like a, quote, weird predator.
Which fits perfectly. A killer who doesn't get winded, who can sprint through the underbrush like an animal, is far scarier than a slow, lumbering brute.
Oh, for sure. And Theron gave him massive praise for this, saying he has an unteachable gut instinct as an actor and single-handedly improvised some of the most iconic moments on set.
That is huge praise coming from her.
It really is. So you have these two incredible actors pushing their minds and bodies to the breaking point. But while Ben is the immediate physical threat holding the weapon, the arena where this deadly game unfolds is the true adversary.
The environment itself.
Exactly, the inescapable adversary. Originally, the script was set in the United States, specifically the granite walls of Yosemite National Park.
But Cormaker pivoted the entire production to Australia.
Right, he wanted a warm climate, yes. But more importantly, he wanted an extreme alien ruggedness, ancient rock formations and harsh flora that audiences just aren't accustomed to seeing as a standard movie backdrop.
And they absolutely refused to compromise on the locations.
No green screens here.
No, they shot deep in the Blue Mountains National Park, heavily utilizing the Grand Canyon walking track. They used the historic, dusty town of Bowning.
And they captured wild, dangerous river rapids at a place called the Needles in Engadine. Not to mention a jaw-dropping 60-kilometer drop at Ginninderra Falls.
Choosing these specific, isolated environments does something to the human psyche, both for the characters and the actors. It just makes you feel entirely insignificant.
And to capture that scale, especially during the Norway Troll Wall flashbacks, they utilized a highly specialized piece of camera technology.
The shot over K1 system, right?
Yes, operated by the Aerial Film Company. It's a 6-axis gyro-stabilized gimbal that mounts right to the nose of a helicopter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it allows the pilot to dive bomb a sheer cliff face while keeping the heavy cinematic lens perfectly, flawlessly steady.
That sounds incredible.
It really is. It lets the audience get mere feet from the rock face, hanging in the air with the climbers, without the helicopter's rotor wash blowing the actors off the mountain.
Getting cameras into the Australian bush was just as demanding, though. Cormaker's dedication to hard-to-reach locations really defies standard production logic.
Like the caves.
Yes. There were subterranean caves in the Blue Mountains that the scouting crew literally had to swim through just to see if they were viable for filming.
That's insane. There's no paved path, no easy access for craft services.
The grit required from the crew is astounding. Because they were shooting in freezing, harsh river environments deep in the bush, hypothermia was a constant looming threat.
So how did they deal with that?
To combat it, the crew had to create makeshift hot tubs for the cast to use between takes.
Oh, nice.
Well, this wasn't some luxury spa setup.
Oh, no.
No, they were literally pumping dirty river water into plastic tubs and running heaters just to elevate the actors' core temperatures so their muscles wouldn't lock up.
Oh, gross. But I guess you gotta do what you gotta do. The visual landscape is punishing, but the environment isn't just visual, it's heavily auditory.
Oh, definitely. The sonic environment of Apex was crafted by the Icelandic composer Högni. And instead of just watching rough cuts in an air-conditioned studio in Los Angeles, he spent 2 full months living on location in the Blue Mountains.
Just absorbing the atmospheric dread of the bush. His approach was wild, because modern thrillers almost universally rely on heavy electronic synthesizers to create tension. You know, those deep, booming, artificial bass drops.
But Högni strictly banned synthesizers.
Right. He wanted to maintain a purely non-urban atmosphere, so he turned to organic, avian, and insect-inspired instrumentation, specifically utilizing woodwinds like oboes and bassoons.
Using a bassoon to mimic an insect requires some really unconventional playing techniques.
Yeah, a bassoon is a double reed instrument, usually associated with rich classical symphonies.
But Högni had musicians use techniques like multiphonics, which is playing multiple notes at once to create this dissonant squawk, and then rhythmic key clicks, too.
The result is a jittering, clicking, animalistic texture. You hear these regal, sweeping human melodies constantly being interrupted and devoured by the fragmented, unpredictable chaos of the wild. So what does this all mean? To me, it's like sensory erosion.
Sensory erosion, I like that.
The landscape and the score don't just sit in the background. They act like a relentless howling wind. They are slowly, methodically stripping away the characters' civilized societal layers, eroding their humanity until absolutely nothing is left except raw, predatory instinct.
This raises an important question for you as the listener to reflect on. How can a movie's unseen elements, like the specific, unnatural trill of a bassoon mimicking a giant cicada, or the visual cue of an actor's skin turning genuinely pale from the real chill of a river, how can that subconsciously trigger our own primal fears?
That's a great point. When we observe authentic struggle, our brains bypass the intellectual safety net that tells us it's just a movie.
Right. The raw sensory input taps directly into our ancient evolutionary fight-or-flight responses.
It hits you right in the nervous system before your brain can even process it. It reminds you exactly how fragile the human body is the second we are stripped of our technology, our homes, and our comforts.
It's very humbling.
Apex leaves you with a deeply uncomfortable thought to mull over long after the credits roll. It forces us to examine the very nature of thrill-seeking. When humans deliberately seek out danger, when we willingly step off the edge of a cliff or paddle into a violent turning rapid, are we truly trying to conquer nature, or are we secretly hoping that nature conquers us?
Wow.
And that wraps our deep dive into Apex. If you're excited to see where this one goes, follow Roll Credits and share it with your fellow movie fans. And don't forget to drop a comment with what movie or show we should cover next, old or new. We'll be back soon with more trivia, more movie magic, and maybe a few more edge-of-your-seat stories.